ADVrider and eBay Motors welcome you to episode 73 of the Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. This week, ADVrider.com managing editor Zac Kurylyk and I talk about the travel ramifications of forest fires, if Harley's announcement of an upcoming lightweight signals a return to a former CEO's action plan, and we have more blowback about inept dealerships. And we tell you what we've been up to this summer. But first, eBay has a few words they'd like to share with you. The Lowdown Show is presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. eBay has reinvented vehicle buying. From click to curb, everything's covered. With their new secure purchase, eBay isn't just where you find your car, it's where you buy it, start to finish. Title, financing, registration, delivery, it's all built in. And eligible vehicle purchases are backed by up to $100,000 in protection. This is what modern car buying looks like. Get your next ride on eBay. eBay. Things people love. Secure purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary. Well, Zac, let's talk about the weather because it's been an exceptionally hot, dry summer, even by hot, dry summer standards. And wildfires have not only made things smoky and given us beautiful sunrises and sunsets, you know, that extra stuff in the atmosphere can be beautiful, but it's impacted motorcycle travel. And you've had a couple of occasions where it's fouled trips of yours.
Yes, I have. Not this year. Woods riding is banned in my area right now, so I can't go ride my dirt bike in the woods. But in the past, I've had a couple of experiences where planned trips either had to make serious changes or were called off due to wildfires in the Canadian North. One in particular I can think of in Newfoundland in 2022. I had planned to visit Harbor Breton, and the highway to that town was cut by the fire or was closed due to the fire, and that was the end of that idea. And then in 2023, I was headed to James Bay, and I made it almost all the way, and then I got caught in the smoke from the James Bay wildfire, and it was kind of a hairy situation, actually. I had to turn around, head out on the Billy Diamond Highway, and ended up staying in Red Cross emergency housing in a rink in the town of Mattagami.
Were they irked that you as a tourist were up there mucking about when locals were in duress?
I don't believe so, because when I was headed up, things weren't as bad as they were when I got there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The situation degraded very quickly while I was riding there. Part of the problem up there is that in northern Canada, if you've never been there, you almost can't conceive of the distance between every point. Like Mattagami is 386 kilometers, or more than 200 miles to the next gas station, and there's no houses on that road, so nobody knows what's going on unless an airplane flies overhead or a helicopter and relays real-time information about the fire. You don't know, and that's what happened to me. I left Mattagami and rode north, and I was fishing the Broadback River, and I had only been fishing a few minutes, and I looked downriver, and there was a smoke cloud coming up, and I thought that's not good, but nothing shocking. I knew there was some wildfires, and then the smoke kept getting thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. I said, I better get out of here. So I jumped on the bike, but I didn't know which way to go because it was at least 250 kilometers back to where I'd come from, and I didn't know if the road was cut in that direction. And it was, I think, 120 kilometers to the next stop, and I didn't know if the road was cut in that direction. And I knew that there was a side road I could get down to Hudson's Bay, but I knew that road was closed. So I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with no intel of which direction to go. And you just don't know because there's no internet up there. There's no phone signal. There's nothing unless you have a satellite communicator. And even that is of dubious help, because it's not like the satellite communicator company has a guy actively monitoring this single wildfire in the middle of nowhere.
Right. So what did you do? Which direction did you head?
Well, I went north for a little bit just to see if the smoke cleared, and it didn't. It actually got worse and worse to the point where you could barely see. So I went south because I said, if I go north, I could get stuck up here for days or weeks. And if I go south, I can probably get out. And I knew that there was gas and so on to the south. So I rode south. I met some guys who were towing a fishing boat. And they said, oh, we just, came through and it was fine 20 miles up the road. And I said, okay, well, that's easy, no problem. I'll just follow you. And we went 20 miles down the road and it was not fine. It got worse and worse and worse. It was towards the end of the day. So it was dark in the sky. And then we had all this smoke and you could barely see eventually. At one point I was riding along and I was only able to navigate from the taillights in front of me or by looking down. Eventually I passed these guys because we ended up in a convoy behind another car. And the guys I was traveling with, they were going a fair speed and they were watching out for me. So that was good. But then we got stuck behind this other car and the guy was driving about 5 kilometers an hour. And I did some quick math and I said, I'll be out here for 20 hours. The distance is up there, hundreds of kilometers. I said, I'd be out here 20 hours following this guy to civilization. And I can't do that. It was raining, believe it or not, in a forest fire. So I was wet and cold. And I said, I have to go on my own ahead of these guys at a faster pace. But in that kind of condition, you don't know if a moose is going to step out in front of you. You don't know if an oncoming transport truck will be over the line and hit you, because there was the odd vehicle, not very many, but there was every half hour, maybe you'd meet somebody. So you don't know if you're going to hit oncoming traffic or they'll hit you. And then visibility got so bad, I couldn't see at all, barely. I was driving along, looking down at the line in the middle of the road underneath my boot. And I knew if I kept my boot lined up with the center line, I'd stay out of the ditch. That was the only visibility I had. And I rode like that for quite a while because, like I said, the distances up there are so long. It takes forever to get anywhere, even if you're doing, 60, 70 kilometers an hour. Eventually, I got out. It cleared up a bit, and then it cleared a bit more. And then I got to the end of the Billy Diamond Highway. They have a checkpoint there so they can keep track of who's going north. And
is that like what happened in grade 2 when you had to, like a hall monitor, you had to let them know when you were leaving the classroom to go to the washroom? Is that kind of situation?
I think it's a pretty similar situation, and probably well needed, to be honest, because there's just so many ways to get in trouble up there.
Right. But, So let me ask you this. I mean, if anyone is planning a trip, the classic ADV trip is to head up the Dempster Highway or some other godforsaken place in the far north. I've been in the far north. I have the scars to prove it. In fact, I was in a float plane that died. That's another story, some other day. But what should people do? I mean, is there a technique, a place to call, Canada Environment or anything? I mean, what should people do if they're planning trips to regions that could be affected by fire?
Well, first off, I would say it's worth taking consideration anywhere northern North America. So this isn't just the Arctic, not just Labrador. If I was going to Montana or Maine in the summer, I would pay attention to this problem because it's increasingly, an issue everywhere. Having said that, it does seem to be a lot bigger problem in Canada than it is in the US at this point, these massive forest fires. So what I would do is take a look at the news as to where I was traveling, just try to get a vibe for whether or not there's talk about drought and that sort of thing. So if I was going to go to Prudhoe Bay or wherever in Alaska, I do a little bit of basic Google research and find out if they were in a drought, find out if there's a wildfire problem, that sort of thing, before I left. And there's some equipment that you can bring with you that can help. Even if you're in the middle of nowhere, you can
like a water bomber.
Like a water bomber, yeah. That's a little hard to pack that in your bike, but
oh, come on. Nick Adams would strap one to the back of that 6,000-year-old Goodsey of his. I know he could.
I think Nick Adams' Gucci is a water bomber, isn't it?
That's just a transmission leak, not to be confused with a water bomber.
I would take a satellite communicator. I mean, you should have one at this point if you're going north anyway. It's very cheap insurance. And that way you have access to some outside information in a place where you might have no other way to access the internet. So the one I have, you have access to a basic emergency help call center that could be of use. That's a Zoleo. I think it's probably the most cost-effective one, but InReach and others are out there. So and now increasingly, even your cell phone has access to satellite networks, which is just starting to become a thing with iPhones in particular. I know in the US, some carriers offer this, and in Canada, Rogers just started offering this as well. So you can, if you're stuck up in the middle of the Dempster, you could theoretically send a note out by satellite to somebody at home who could at least find some information for you about what's going on.
Well, now that we know how horrible things can get when you're not paying attention, don't I know it? I haven't paid attention for years, and but there are ways around this, and there obviously time of year to travel I would have something to do with it, I suppose.
Yes, I mean you can get a drought any time of the year, but I would think that going in spring or fall would be a smart choice now if you wanted to head north. There are some reasons other than wildfires you might want to think that through carefully. You don't want to be stuck up there in mud season.
Black fly season, my friend.
Or black fly season.
Black flies, they make forest fires look like, just a nice relaxing break.
You might beg for a forest fire if you're caught out in black fly season.
Exactly.
But me personally, if I go back to Labrador, which Labrador was shut down, the Trans-Labrador Highway was shut down last year because of forest fires, so you couldn't get through. If I was going to go there, I would go in early fall at this point. The days are a bit shorter, but fewer flies, hopefully fewer fires.
All right, let's move on to new motorcycles. There's a bunch of new things coming out in the next little while, and what's going on?
We're just on the edge of show season, so traditionally August, September, you start to see the new stuff peeking out, and we've already seen a few of these new models revealed. KTM just showed their new 690 not last week. Very few details, but it's good to see that model is being carried forward. And then a few days before that, we caught news of the new Harley-Davidson Sprint. We know nothing about it, but we do know that it's coming soon, and we should see it on this year's show circuit, I would think, in the next 6 weeks at least.
Interesting that they. I actually saw an original Harley-Davidson Sprint from the '60s, which of course is an Aramaki Italian bike that they rebadged. And Michael Ullerick and I on the last podcast talked about this a little bit, but Harley has never ever really gotten small bikes right, and they've just. I just think they've never had their heart in it. And Michael talked about that. When they made the Street 500 and 750, not that those are tiny bikes, but 500 is, I guess, these days. But they spec'd the absolute lowest components because they wanted to make big bike margins on an inexpensive motorcycle. And I really hope they get this figured out because, Matt Levatich, the 2 CEOs ago now, who had this all roads to Harley-Davidson, and he kind of had this idea that they would, all roads to Harley-Davidson. And then Zeitz came in and wanted to do the premium sector. Now, is this a flip-flop back to the Levatich program, I wonder?
I'd be really curious to see how this one plays out.
It feels haphazard, doesn't it? Like it just feels like we're going to make a small bike. It's like, really?
I would agree with that. I will say that Zeitz he seemed very focused in how he ran the company over the past few years. He was all in on the big, expensive motorcycles. And I don't know that was a good long-term idea. I'm no expert on the inner workings of Harley-Davidson, but I see when I see a Harley on the highway now, it typically is one of those big expensive motorcycles. I see fewer and fewer of the old, cheaper models that they used to sell. As far as the Sprint goes, the original one was not a great motorcycle, but they still sold quite a few of them. I think people underestimate how many of those bikes were actually sold because they were not as successful as the Japanese competition, but they still sold quite a few of them. And I think that if Harley-Davidson could come up with a modern equivalent, a motorcycle engine that you could use in, sort of a sporty little bike, a cruiser type thing, and maybe even put it in a scrambler, I think that they would have quite a bit of interest as long as people could afford it. That's the main problem. It has to be a bike that's not execrable, and it has to be affordable. If they can do both of those things, it would be great.
Well, it can, sorry to jump in here, but it can be done. I mean, look what Triumph did with that 400. What a great looking little bike. It carries on the visual lineage of the rest of the retro classic, whatever they call them, bikes they make. And it's a good looking bike. And I got a guy blew by me on one in traffic the other day. And so they obviously they're not gutless. They can go at 80 miles an hour. So, what a great little bike. And why can't Harley-Davidson do that?
That bike is a very good example to point to because Harley-Davidson has a similar bike they're selling in India right now. It's made by an Indian partner, but it has the Sprint problem, like the original Sprint. Not enough power, too much weight. Now,
is that 440cc?
Yes.
Oh, it's hideous looking, Zach.
Compared to the Benelli built 500 that they're selling, that they use in the rider schools here in North America, that 440 is Lana Turner compared to that 500 Benelli monstrosity.
Right. Well, anyway, they just never seem to get this stuff right. And while we're talking about Harley-Davidson, what's really interesting is that, I mean, they won't come on this podcast. I wanted to talk. The Pan America is a flop, right? It's not selling, and very well. And so I thought, well, you know what? Because I'm a generous person by nature, I thought, let's have Harley-Davidson on. Let's get me some engineers or some design people, which I love talking to them because I love design and engineering, and we'll talk about it. But the Harley-Davidson public relations people told me I had to have a list of preset questions. Like this is not Watergate. I'm not doing an inquiry. I just want to yak about a motorcycle. But I would have had to supply all my questions and not go off piste on any questions. And so ultimately they I said, well, listen, it's not really going to work, is it? So, and this is Harley-Davidson. I mean, don't they like this to the world? And yet they are such a timid company. They're so fearful.
What's the name of that guy that does all those hit pieces on the American establishment, or the leftists? What's his name? James. Oh, I can't remember his name. Anyway, he's the guy who sets up all the fake dates, and then he gets the people to blab about what's going on in their government corner. You need to hire that guy. Send him down to Milwaukee.
Well, it's a shame because Harley-Davidson should exist, and they should be a strong company. I would love it if they would get back to that. It's just it's a shame to see them flounder endlessly. And as Michael Ullert pointed out, in the last decade, and Harley-Davidson is always saying, headwinds, we're facing headwinds, and it's probably smoky headwinds, because that's what's going on this summer.
Comes across the lake.
It comes across the lake, and Milwaukee is smoked in and fogged in those headwinds, But as Michael pointed out, the luxury motorcycle segment keeps growing. All the numbers go up, even KTM until the recent woes, but Harley-Davidson is doing this. They're going down. So,
well, there is one. There's two things that suggest to me that they can do well with the Sprint. First off is before 2022, 2023, they always said any Harley-Davidson sold in North America or in the USA will be made in the USA. I'm sure you've seen that promise.
Yeah.
But that's not the case anymore because the new Sportster, whatever they call it, and the Pan America are both made in Thailand now and brought in. So that promise is gone. So they can now bring in, since they've already made that move, they can bring in a foreign-made small capacity motorcycle that they might actually turn a profit on.
Yeah, as long as again, as long as they don't use the shittiest components to try to get a big bike, return on their investment. Because the trouble with the small bikes is, a dealer makes 10% on a motorcycle when they sell it, 10 or 11%, and so a $6,000 motorcycle, and that's the dealer and the company itself not very much money, but Harley is. I mean, as Michael said, most brands make. Say 3 or 4% on a motorcycle, and Harley in the good years was making 22 and 23% profit on a bike. I mean, it was the envy of the industry, but I mean that ship has sailed, and it seems like they can't get over that. eBay has reinvented vehicle buying from click to curb. Everything's covered. It's all thanks to their new secure purchase. Ever try to buy a car and end up in a parking lot with a stranger and some blind trust? Or spend half the day at the dealership talking to pushy salespeople and signing paperwork? Or maybe, worst of all, waiting for hours at the DMV just to transfer the title? Well, that era is over. For years, eBay has been the go-to for gearheads, collectors, and do-it-yourselfers. Because whatever you're into, from classics to SUVs to trucks to imports, eBay's got it. And now with secure purchase, eBay isn't just where you find your next ride, it's where you can buy it, start to finish. Sellers and titles are verified, paperwork is handled by experts, and payments are traceable and digital. So you know exactly who you're dealing with and exactly what you're getting. Plus, you can finance, insure, and register your vehicle all in one place. No more hours at the dealership, no more trips to the DMV. Get your vehicle, plates, and paperwork shipped to your door, ready to drive. And it's all part of one seamless process, designed to feel as easy as buying anything else online. And eligible vehicles purchased on eBay are backed by up to $100,000 in purchase protection. Thinking about selling your ride? Secure purchase makes that simple too, because your buyer and their funds are verified. If you still owe in your car, the financing payoff is fully integrated, so you're not chasing paperwork or waiting on checks to clear. And with secure purchase, you get paid fast, and you're not going to be stuck chasing no-shows or answering the fifth "is it still available?" message. This is what modern car buying looks like. Skip the DMV, skip the sketchy meetups. Buy it on eBay. eBay. Things people love. Secure Purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary. The Lowdown Show is presented by ADVrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. There are companies other than Harley-Davidson, and they have some new motorcycles coming out. What else? We've got this. You mentioned the KTM. What else is on the horizon of interest?
Kawasaki teased this new KLE model last year on the show circuit, and I was convinced we would have seen it by now. We haven't, so that says it's probably an EICMA release. Some people think it will be a hybrid. Some people think it will be based off their 450, 500 platform, and also come in a hybrid, because their hybrid bikes are based off the 450s or 500s, whatever they call it. So that will be
a twin or a single?
It'll be a twin. Same engine as the Ninja 500 if it's internal combustion, and it will be the same as their ZX7 hybrid or whatever that bike is called if it is a hybrid.
One story that's been gaining traction on the website is dealerships, and I had a gentleman on, and we spoke a two-parter podcast about the dealerships from the dealership perspective. And then so many readers and listeners reached out with absolute wretched horror stories about dealing with motorcycle dealerships. And just, I mean, I know in my particular case, I've actually had I've had both experiences. I remember going into an old motorcycle shop that had been around since 1914 or something, and going in with a part number for a brake pad, and was essentially driven out the door because I wouldn't give my brand of motorcycle initially, and then I did, and it was for my old Norton, and they said they don't make brake pads for those. And anyway, it was a horrible experience, and I never went back to that dealership. But I also deal with another shop now for parts, and they're fabulous. It's like a modern, efficiently run business. But one of the issues that came up, and I still don't understand this about selling motorcycles or cars for that matter. Like if I go in and say buy a pack of smokes, which would be unusual as a non-smoker. But let's just say I bought a pack of smokes and a case of beer. Well, they don't charge me a fee to put it on the shelf, and they don't charge me a fee to prep it for me. And you know, the price is the price that you paid this, and then whatever applicable tax in your region. Why motorcycling still has this vehicle sales, I guess in general, has this antiquated notion that you have to, okay, well, you need, there's a PDI, and you need to, the assembly fee and the shipping fee. That is such bullshit. And I don't know why that exists anymore. I don't know why consumer groups or government, mandates don't say, listen, just put the price on it. It's insane to me.
I mean, it is doable because that's how they sell motorcycles in the UK, I believe. I'm fairly certain that when you look at the MSRP of a Honda UK motorcycle, that includes everything. And, it would seem to make a lot more sense to me. But going back to your example of the pack of smokes, what would you feel like if you went to the dep and you went in and they said, we can order that for you and get it here next week? And you could go on a website and order the exact same pack of smokes and get it there in 2 days. That's the real problem that I see at dealerships these days. They just don't have stock.
But are you talking about accessories? You're talking about motorcycles proper?
I mean, motorcycles proper, but I get that. And I understand why you might not have accessories, but I'm talking about wear parts like tires or tire tubes even, or bearings, things like that. I mean, I understand why you wouldn't have a replacement speedometer for a GSXR 750, something like that. Like, everybody understands that stuff. Of course, that's an order item. But, tire tubes. I mean, it's not like a 17-inch tire tube fits a KLR, fits a DR650. I mean, those are extremely common motorcycles, and you're going to sell a few of them every year. Why wouldn't you have them in stock? But that's increasingly the problem.
Well, I think, we know the answer, don't we? Because people buy stuff online and they just can't compete with prices. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. But you're right. I mean, the shop that I get Ducati parts from, maybe this isn't relevant because my junk is so old. It's 30 years old. But you would think that they'd have a head gasket, for a model that had a 12-year or 14-year production run or something like that. But I guess that's not the case. But I still don't understand, because it is so off-putting, the whole sort of, the price is not the price until, and there's one gentleman in the comment section, phoned up a dealership, and I think he was in California, and this was in the Central Valley, the dealership, and he drove 2.5 hours because he had a commitment on a price. He phoned up and said, okay, what's the price? And they said this. And then they got there, and all of a sudden they started tacking things on. And he turned around and drove home. And the dealership apparently was shocked that he actually went that far and didn't buy it. But I don't know. And if you think back, young buck like you may not remember this, but General Motors had in fact, I had one, a Saturn, the plastic car, because my brother worked at a division of GM and I got a discount, which still didn't make it worthwhile. But anyway, they had this brilliant marketing plan, which was actually good. And it just, the price is the price. You come in. And so a lot of buyers, including a lot of women who always feel screwed over at a dealership, would just go in and there was a price in the windshield and that was it. And, unfortunately, it wasn't really a car worth buying, but I thought that the principle behind it was actually worthwhile.
Well, I've had my own tactic for dealing with that issue over the years. And that's to buy always the, cheapest car that they have where there's no margin at all. I know they can't move on the price.
All show me, right? All show me.
That's exactly right. The price is the price, buddy. We're making $10 on that car. We're not going to move on it. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. There was another story in the comments section that I saw about somebody who bought a Goldwing at a dealer that was a few hours away and had the paperwork confirmed with the VIN and everything, and drove down. And they had sold that same Goldwing to somebody else and tried to sell him one with a different color and a big scratch on the saddlebag. I mean, just cheeky stuff like that. And it's too bad, because I know some good dealerships. I know good people who work at dealerships, and I know good dealerships that are really in it not just for themselves, but for their customers and for motorcycling in general. And those dealerships tend to be prosperous
And
as
just
long as
and go find, like, and don't, like, part of this is on us too. It's like, ask around. I remember a guy reached out to me once and said, I love Yamaha snowmobiles and outboards and I don't know, whatever else they make, generators, and I love my Yamaha whatever, and I'm thinking about buying a Tenere. What do you think? Should I buy a Yamaha? And the dealer has a great reputation, and I have a long-standing relationship with them. It's like, and I think these days, honestly, the dealership is as important as the vehicle. I mean, there are really no shitty motorcycles anymore. There are very few. It's not like the old days when, you could buy English stuff that was just useless. But charming, but useless. But now, the dealership experience, especially with this perpetual connectivity we have in the modern world, which is mostly bad, except for YouTube, self-help videos, which I love. But, you can reach out, go to the forums on ADVrider.com, put in where you live, find a dealership, do the legwork. And if you can get a name of a guy at a dealership that has a good reputation, forge a relationship that way.
that's a good point. Motorcycles, I mean, we all have our preferences, but the reality is, like you say, all modern bikes are basically decent machines. I haven't ridden a bad new motorcycle since 2014. And that's why I'm not invited on Honda launches anymore. But you're far more likely to have a bad experience with your dealer than you are with your motorcycle. So that's what you need to be concerned about first. And, do your, like you say, do your legwork. I'm fortunate enough that I have good relationship with my local dealer, parts counter guy. I have other people around in this general area that I know I can trust to take care of me. And I'm grateful for that, because some people don't have that at all. There are a few bad dealerships around here, but there are a few good ones. I cannot imagine how irritating it would be to live where there are no good dealerships. And that is some places.
I have to give a shout out to my first dealership. Kind of like your first love, your first dealership. And how exciting it was to go into a motorcycle dealership. Oh my God. But my first motorcycle was a Hodaka Combat Wombat, Japanese, off-brand Japanese bike. And Roy's Cycle World in Trenton, Ontario, Canada. And Roy, who was always behind the counter, would drop his head when I would come in, because he had stopped selling Hodakas years before, but he still had the parts, and he wanted to sell the parts. So here's this 13-year-old kid, and I'd come in and put everything out, all my transmission parts, on his glass showcase, and he would be horrified, and he'd get me my parts, and he, was eventually glad to see the end of me. But he was a professional, and he did get me my parts, and he sold them to me cheap, because just to get rid of this stuff. And I have great fondness towards Roy's Cycle World, the long gone Roy's Cycle World.
A lot of those good old dealers are long gone now. I remember when I started riding, I had a Kawasaki KZ 750 L3, which is considerably different from a Combat Wombat. And my local Kawasaki dealer was Toymaster Power Sports. And it was a lot of fun going in there when you're a new rider. You look around and see, I mean, this would have been the 2000s, early 2000s. So, everything was pretty basic back then compared to what you see at dealerships now. But it was just a really cool experience for a new rider. And now I don't know that you would have that.
Well, all those, and of course, the most beautiful thing about a motorcycle dealership is all those off-gassing chemicals coming from tires and vinyl and stuff. It's just like, whoa, what a great stench. Zac, you and I have been doing lots of motorcycle stuff, very different motorcycle stuff this summer, and you've been on the road. Where have you gone?
Most of my trips this year have been Atlantic Canada. I just got back from a week in Cape Breton in July. That was a lot of fun, dual sport riding around the Cape Breton Highlands. And I've talked about that on here before. That's one of my favorite places to ride, maybe my absolute favorite place to ride in the world.
I have been going in circles this summer, and not the usual circles that I go in, but I've been road racing again, my vintage Ducati, 1997 748. with Kurylyk connecting rods, pistol pistons, oversized valves, and a lifespan about like that of stinky cheese. But there's been a lot of mechanical glitches, but to be back on the racetrack is amazing. And racing is and we were talking about this before, but racing is, it's pure heroin. It is the biggest addiction, any kind of racing, on road, off road, whatever it is. And it's been great to be back. And I actually still have a decent pace. Got to knock a couple seconds off. But no, the past weekend I was out 2 podiums at a track that's called Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, which is a horrible name. It's actually Mosport, the original name of the track. Former F1 World Superbike track. So yeah, it's been wonderful to get out there again. And of course, all the beautiful thing about racing is the intensity and the camaraderie. And I had tons of mechanical issues. And an old friend of mine, Martin Wingate, came along, old speedway racing friend, and it's great. And then you get home and you're so exhausted. I got home, I'm still exhausted. And but man, I realized how much I missed racing. And if any of you out there have ever raced, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you haven't raced, you think, what's a guy your age doing on a racetrack going 157 miles an hour? And but until you try it, don't knock it.
That's probably a question you asked yourself mid-corner once or twice.
Well, when the front starts to push or the rear starts to come around, you do have those moments of, oh my God, I hope this doesn't go badly. And one guy at the track had a terrible off, broke both his ankles, femur, and whacked his brain. And ended up in an ICU at a major hospital in the city. So, things can go wrong very quickly. But of course, when they don't go wrong, that's when you really, you think this is living, folks. But madly racing in circles isn't really your thing, Zach. And you're more of a, would you say you're a leisurely rider? How would you describe your riding style when you're touring?
Leisurely is a fairly accurate way of putting it.
Yeah. Are you kind of like, are you like an at the speed limit guy, or just like pushing it, but not too much?
When we ride around here on the street, we know what the speed limit is, and we know what we can get away with. We know where the RCMP are. A lot of people don't realize that there is almost zero traffic enforcement here on the East Coast. If you're not on a major highway and you're not in a town, the chances of getting a ticket are minimal. But I will say that the guys I ride with, even the most, red mist type guys, most of us have dialed it back in the past few years. Now, if I was in your case with, no kids at home and that sort of thing, maybe I would be looking to add a little bit of excitement in my life. But right now with kids at home, it's just nice to go away for a week and see a few things and push, you push your edge. We were on some backcountry stuff that was outside maybe our comfort zone. And one trail in particular, there's no way we should have been on it. But we just took our time and got it done and had fun exploring, I guess.
And it's also the ramifications of, and this is where I'm actually quite I wouldn't say slow street rider, but I certainly have slowed down in recent years. But racing, once you race, everything else is just like going for milk. And so, you don't have that urge to really push it because, like, what's the point? Why am I pushing hard? For what reason? There's no reason, you just risk damage to yourself and the bike and speeding tickets and all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually quite I pick my moments when I'm on the road. And I'm, one of the things that's kind of interesting that I find is that once you've raced, it's very hard to ride on the street, which is why most racers don't ride on the street. It's just because it's like, what's my motivation? Because you're really not doing it for travel. We all have cars and we use those. So it's a completely different mindset. And for me on a street ride, what I do is for me to enjoy a street ride, it's like, I've got to like make my bed. Everything's got to be done. I've got to be on top of things. I can't go when there's emails that I need to respond to. And generally, if everything is in place at home and I go to a coffee shop through the hills, that's kind of my street riding. And then I have to get home and get back to work because I got to make money like everybody else. eBay has reinvented vehicle buying. From click to curb, everything's covered. Ever try to buy a car in line and end up in a parking lot with a stranger and some blind trust? Well, that era is over. Now with secure purchase, eBay isn't just where you find your car, it's where you buy it, start to finish. Title, financing, registration, delivery. It's all built in. This is the modern way to buy your next ride on eBay. eBay, things people love. Secure purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary.